Hey everyone, Dr. Logan here. Today we're going to talk about copyright law. In case you're not aware, this is kind of my specialty. This is sort of what I do for a living. I'm not a copyright lawyer, but if you ever run into copyright problems in your real life or intellectual property problems, reach out to me. I'm a lot cheaper than a copyright lawyer. What we're going to do here with this lecture is I'm going to give a big copyright overview. We're going to talk about a lot of cases, and we're going to go very in depth. As not just a communication scholar, but as a citizen, as a regular person, copyright is something that you will bump elbows with constantly throughout your life, throughout your everyday things that you do. Every time you're on YouTube, every time you send an email, every time you watch a movie online or you download something, you're bumping elbows with copyright law. And so what we're going to do today is really take an in-depth look at what it is and what it means. And then this same Prezi, the back, well, I'd say the back maybe third or fourth of it, which focuses on the internet, is going to be set up into a separate shorter lecture that you'll look at next time. Okay, so to begin here, intellectual property, IP, what is it? Well, there's three different kinds. We've got patents, we got trademarks, and we got copyright. A patent is more for scientific use. You will patent an invention that you make, for instance. Trademarks are logos. They are Nike checks and the Pepsi logo and those kinds of things that you see all the time. Those never expire. So trademark law lasts forever. A copyright, though, this is what we put on written works and some scientific discoveries. And this is what we mean by copyright and protected works. It is just that. It is a copyright. So the idea, as it is engraved into our Constitution in the United States, is to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discovery. Now, the aspects of this we're really going to unpack here and that we're going to be looking at all week is, first of all, this notion of promoting the progress of science and the useful arts. So when we talk about copyright law, we need to talk about, is this promoting science and the arts or not? Is this something that is indeed useful? Or is it something that is setting back progress, that is making it harder to access the arts, making it harder for science to work? And also for limited times. So copyright isn't meant to last forever. Well, right now in the United States and really just about everywhere else, copyright is essentially beginning to get to a point to where it lasts forever. So let's look at a few things here. What can be copyrighted? And we'll go through all of these, but reproduction of the work, meaning that if you write a book and it's reproduced, you get paid for that. Preparation of the derivative works. So if you write a play and people are taking things from that or their sequels or something like that, you get money for that preparation. Public distribution of the work, so where your music or what have you is distributed. Performance of the work, so if you write a play or if you write music, you get paid for that. Also, this is why if you are a bar or if you own a bar that has cover bands, you have to pay for those cover bands or those tribute bands to come in and play those songs, because this is a performance of a work. Public display of the work, so this often counts for art, for instance, and public digital performance of a sound recording. Okay, so we have an internet radio station that I'm the faculty advisor of, UHDI Radio, here at UHD. Public digital performance of a sound recording means that we have to make sure that we are licensed to distribute those, to distribute the music that we play on there. In the past, this wasn't the case, and then in about 2007, there was a big fit from some of the major players in this licensing that goes on with music, and a lot of internet radio stations got shut down, and that's why now we kind of only have Pandora and Last.fm still hanging around, and everything's moving to Spotify and Apple Music. But this is something that got added to copyright in about 2007 or so, this last one here. What can we not copyright? Trivial material. So these are titles and slogans. These are things that you say and you have those just trademarked. They're the Texas Hammer kind of thing. He probably has a trademark on all of those things. Ideas. You can't copyright just an idea that you have. Facts. You cannot copyright facts. So examples that we have of this are transcripts of interviews or something like that. Historical facts. So here in a bit, we're going to talk about a case having to do with the Zapruder film, which is what JFK was shot, and someone tried to copyright that. Telephone books and databases, important case there. Vice Publications via rural telephone services. Essentially, they were putting out the same phone book, and Rural Telephone Services was trying to argue that no, we copyrighted the phone book. And the idea was that no, these are just facts. This was pure data. You cannot copyright this. We've seen some change in database law over time, but essentially this is still the case. You can't copyright these very simple things that don't take any idea. Utilitarian goods, you can't copyright water. Now, unfortunately, people have found loopholes into, say, patenting water and that kind of thing, but for the most part, no. Methods, systems, math, formulas, these are usually patents. E equals mc squared, you can't copyright that, but you can make a formula for an invention or something that's going to be invented or could be useful, and then you can make patents out of that. You see that a lot with Silicon Valley and that kind of thing. Now, getting into what we were talking about copyright duration. Remember, when we're talking about copyright, we're talking about for a limited time. So we have only things under copyright for a limited time, and then ideally it moves into the public domain. When something is in the public domain, that should mean that anyone is able to access it. So Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, some old book like that, you can go and you can access it. There's a reason that people are always making movies about Shakespeare plays. And it's not just because Shakespeare is this obvious, incredible figure in our history, but also because you don't have to pay any copyrights on that work. So anything old like that in the 1800s, you can make as many movies, as many stories as you want about it. Now though, let's go back. Let's look way back. Copyright duration. When this nation was founded, it was 14 years with 14 years renewal. And maybe that kind of mattered a little bit because people didn't tend to live that long back then. 1831, we expanded, 28 years, 14 years renewal. 1909, 28 years, 28 years renewal. 1976, and so in 1976, the United States jumps on board with all these trade agreements with Europe and such. You don't even know about all of that, but it's about the time the United States is becoming kind of this information superpower, and so they want to get caught up with the rest of the world on copyright, and the rest of the world was actually pretty bad about copyright. So pretty bad as in having far too long copyright extensions. So then we get the life of author plus 50 years, or 75 years for work for hire. This is a very long time. No one's living that long. And by work for hire, we mean if you are writing something that is syndicated. So if you are the author of Spider-Man or something like that, they get it for the life of the author, plus 75 years after that, since those kinds of things tend to have a lot of different authors. And that is the Copyright Extension Act of '76. In 1998, we get the Sonny Bono Copyright Act. Sonny Bono, some of you older students, some of you may remember that Sonny Bono was the husband of Cher, of Sonny and Cher, of the singer Cher. And what happened then is he became a senator out of Orlando. Well, what's in Orlando? Disney is in Orlando. And so what was going on then was Mickey Mouse's copyright was about to expire. And so Mickey Mouse Disney wanted to make sure that that did not expire. So he passes a Copyright Act. Sonny Bono does in Congress, gets it passed, and it's named after him. And it's now 70 years or 95 years for work for hire, which is just an incredible amount of time. That's beyond any of our lifetimes, really, for a work that is put out there. So nothing then is basically going into the public domain. And by the time it's eligible for the public domain, no one really remembers it anymore. It might be lost, what they call an orphan work. And so we've got these insanely long copyright extensions. This goes to court with the Eric Eldred v. John Ashcroft in 2002. This is a major case where we're arguing about these copyright acts. Now, if you remember in our last lecture, when we were talking about Citizens United and the idea of anti-avoidance, the idea of, in that case, they could have just carved out an exemption for Hillary the movie or said that these kind of documentaries were okay, the courts could have. Just as in this case, they could have said that, oh, if you have Mickey Mouse or the Avengers or some long-standing property like that, we can carve exemptions for that. But instead of doing that, the Supreme Court said, no, absolutely not. Instead, we're just going to have these absurdly long copyright laws. And so that is what we have ended up with today. That's where we are. Okay. Now, even though we have copyright, we do have fair use. The way fair use works is it depends on these 4 factors. Now, it is worth noting, I do a lot of copyright advisory things for libraries. I go from school districts or different colleges, and I'll make these kind of talks on, what is fair use and how can the library use that. And the answer is usually this is the fundamentals of fair use, but at the end of the day, all that matters is if someone decides to sic lawyers on you or not. And when we talk a little bit more about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and some of the digital things, the way this works, which we're not going to get in too much detail about in this class, but we will touch on next time, we'll see how a lot of that works and how some of that is the case. So the first thing we've got here is the effect on market value. So if I am reproducing your work in some way, it's not fair use if it's hurting your bottom line, if it's hurting your margins, if it's taking money away from you. The purpose and the character of the use. This matters as well. So I'm going to get to a particularly kind of odd case here. So Houghton Mifflin Co. v. Norham Publishing Company. What you need to know is that in the 1930s in the United States, Houghton Mifflin was printing copies of Mein Kampf, which you may know as Hitler's memoir, which very much calls for the extermination of all Jews and lots of other heinous things. And Houghton Mifflin, though, in English, they were only publishing a bare bones version of the book. They were taking out all the offensive or the really offensive stuff that Hitler was saying. So unless you sprechen ein Deutsche, unless you spoke the German, you could not access this stuff. So you didn't know what Hitler was really saying, and so you might read those books and kind of be swayed by his opinions, not realizing that he's just going full-on fascism with the things that he's saying. So Norham Publishing Company decided to print these excerpts and some explainers, and they got sued by Houghton Mifflin Co., which said that it had an effect on the market value and that it was the character of the use. It was just excerpts of Mein Kampf, which they own the copyrights to, and so because of that, there were 500 copies, and they all had to be trashed. They had to be pulled. And so it's not until the 1940s that full unedited editions of Mein Kampf, once Hitler is the enemy, start coming into the United States. And so that did a great deal of damage. And so that's one of our worst IP cases that we'll look at as far as the damage that some of this stuff can do. The other one, Campbell v. Acuff Rose Music. I'm going to go to this clip right quick, but I'm going to stop it almost immediately since this is on YouTube, and I will probably get hit with a copyright violation of my own if I show the actual song. So, all right, what you need to know, and you can look the track up, is it's Two Live Crew's cover of Pretty Woman. And it is it's not graphic, but we've talked about Two Live Crew in this class before and the kinds of music that they would make, stuff like Pop That Pussy or what have you. And so this is a really lewd version of Pretty Woman that they put out. And so this goes to court. And what it's found in here, the character of the use, this is an example where we get to talk about parody. So the judge said that no, even though this was word for word with Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman, it was a parody. And the judge goes on to say that it's not just a parody of the song itself, but a parody of this extremely white 1950s culture that tries to present itself as not as sexualized as modern rap music, but absolutely was, and that Two Live Crew in this instance was just calling out the hypocrisy of old rock and roll and just this old white kind of record industry tradition, which maybe the judge was looking a little too far into that, maybe not. Rowling v. RDR Works. By Rowling, you probably know exactly who I'm talking about. That's J.K. Rowling. RDR Books was putting out J.K. Rowling Harry Potter Encyclopedia. She had that shut down, saying that that affected market value and that it was basically just stealing her stuff. She then used copies of that same encyclopedia to write the last couple of books. Interesting. All right, amount substantially copied. Here's another one that is a little frustrating. SunTrust v. Houghton Mifflin Co. So we're back to Houghton Mifflin Co. again. The Wind Done Gone by Alice Randall. Perhaps you've heard of this book. If not, perhaps it's something that you should read. Alice Randall put this out, and it was a parody in some ways. They argued it wasn't a parody of Gone with the Wind. And so the idea is that in Gone with the Wind, it romanticizes these southern slave owners and just antebellum South and all of this. And so what this is, it's about a woman who is an illegitimate child of one of the slave owners in Gone with the Wind. And so it's really vicious toward that whole society and those people and that past and all of this. This goes to court. This book has to be pulled. They say that it is not enough to be parody. It needs to go. But there was such a public outcry about this. Again, the law as this social object, not just this foundational science of justice. There was such a social outcry that Houghton Mifflin ended up settling it out of court, and essentially all that they asked was that all proceeds from the book would go to the estate of the original authors of Gone with the Wind, which is still, in my expert legal opinion, kind of crappy. Okay, MP3 blogs, we're going to skip over those. I don't know how relevant that really is to this, and we're going to talk about it soon anyway. Nature of the copyrighted work. This is what I was talking about earlier. This was Time Inc. for Bernard Geis Associates. This had to do with the Zapruder film, with the JFK assassination film. Some guy tried to copyright it. They said, no, this is historical evidence. You can't have a copyright over the president being killed. That's ridiculous. So that was because of the nature of that, because it was something that was a part of history. So those are your four that you need to know. Fair use, the effect on market value, purpose and character of use, amount substantially copied, and nature of the copyrighted work. Okay, this is where we're going to stop, and then we'll jump back in next time talking about this reading that you have to do, Cory Doctorow's How Copyright Broke, and we'll talk a little bit about copyright law in the 21st century. All right, thanks.